Thank you, Startup Tamil Nadu, for inviting me here. We are going to be talking about a different kind of innovation today. Uh, Step change. Most organizations are good at what we call incremental innovation. Innovation which is gradual in nature, where you make tweaks. That's needed, absolutely. But every once in a while, if you look at the history of innovation of any industry, you'll find that the growth curve isn't very smooth. Every once in a while, a step change happens. Step change happens when someone comes in and challenges the current paradigm and changes the game. That's what step change is. But the tools and methods needed to make step change happen. What is needed for a step change are it's two kinds of thinking broad and thinking deep. Most organizations are too focused on themselves and their value chains, ending with the consumer. What is needed for them is to zoom out and say, what does my supra system look like? The industry ecosystem. So do I have the ability to make sense of the larger ecosystem I'm a part of and then make changes? What role do I need to play in that ecosystem? That's one. Two is thinking deep, not just thinking broad, but also thinking deep. What are the deeper needs I'm catering to? Now let's try and understand what these mental models are, because every industry kind of becomes trapped in the same old usual mental models. And when the time for step change happens or it comes, you need to challenge those foundational mental models. What are mental models? Let's look at that. If you look at this visual on the screen, if I were to ask you, what do you see? Typically, the people say that we see an inverted map, a map that's upside down. Give a printout of a map like this to people, they'll kind of instinctively turn it around like that. But after a while, they just turn it back and say, no, the words are upside down, and then they give it back to you saying, there's something wrong with your map. Actually, there's nothing wrong with the map like this. We found it in an Australian atlas. And there was something written under the map in small print, and I'm going to read it out for you, that tells you that'll show you the kind of mental model we live with. It said, no apologies are called for in presenting the map with south at the top. After hundreds of years of development, the southern lands have no reason to be under the northern hemisphere. A very irreverent thought. In the map that I just showed you, we are just standing on the North Pole and looking down. The moment you change the perspective, the map seems to have changed. We've grown up with seeing a world map in the atlases that we've seen or in the geography lessons that we've studied. And that map is absolutely etched in our heads. If I were to blindfold you and ask you to draw the map, you'll be able to draw a very accurate map. You'll say, okay, North America, South America, Europe, Asia, and Australia down under. But when someone shows a map like this to you, it doesn't match with your schema, what's etched in your head, and you reject it. That's what mental models are. So there's nothing wrong with a world that looks like this. Mental models are algorithms of the mind. They are deep-rooted thinking constructs that dictate the way we make meaning and make choices. All citizens of the same paradigm will think alike. But the organization that is planning to make a step change happen will have to become aware of the mental model, the current mental models that dictate the way the whole world thinks about that problem, that challenge, and maybe challenge it. There are three core areas that any organization that is wanting to make a step change happen need to think about. The core why. What is the compelling future-focused purpose that we are uniquely placed to stand for? That's our why. And when our why is in place and we are anchored in our why, what, what are our offerings, our products and our services? Because when we offer our products and services, take them to the market, we achieve our why. And how are the business and technology formats we use to deliver our what? These are three fundamental questions, and these are where our current mental models will not allow us to go beyond what we are thinking about. We wrote a book. That time, my business partner, Anisha Motwani, wrote a book called Storm the Norm, and I had developed an innovation methodology by the same name. This book is on its 12th print run now. And what we did was, when we started out, we realized when the startup ecosystem was becoming very vibrant, and we were working a lot with the large corporates, the legacy companies, facilitating innovation, we realized there are two ways of dealing with innovation out there. There is the legacy, large organization way of dealing with innovation, and there's the startup way. And somehow, there was a versus that was creeping in, our way versus your way, and we thought, maybe we could borrow from both. If startups could, or if corporates could do with some startup spirit, for sure, startups can learn a lot from the corporates or legacy companies. When it comes to discipline to scale, a lot of startups flounder. That's where maybe they could pick up some learnings from the larger corporates. So what we did was we created a long list of large number of organizations that had stormed the norms of their respective industries and created a step change happen. Or they had created an unprecedented vibrancy in the industry and had become new leaders. So we looked at three categories of organizations. One, large organizations that had endured, had found new relevance. Very, very old organizations, some even more than 100 years old. Then we found some challenger organizations that came in and challenged the current paradigms, challenged the current leader, and became the new leaders. So they were the challengers. And the third were the new age kind of companies, the startups. And we said, let's look at all three. And we were okay with, we said, let's look for patterns out there. And we were fine with finding three patterns. We said, okay, the legacy company patterns, the challenger organization patterns, and the new age company patterns. Guess what? We found one. And we realized any organization that needs to challenge, really storm the norms of their industry, maybe needs to follow this 5-stage process. And this is what organizations that we studied were actually doing, either by design or inadvertently. Because innovation is part design and part serendipity in any case. So I will take you through these 5 stages of storm the norm, how organizations go about doing this. And if you have to do it in your industry, how you can do it by design. So, one thing was staring at us when we looked at all of these examples, that market storms aren't purely accidental. There's a method to the magic. And that magic is what we were trying to decode. This is the first stage. Stale, stagnant market. Stale, stagnant markets are strange. The incumbents don't even know that the market has turned stale. It's like you are you've been living in a house for a long time, and suddenly a friend comes in and says, "What's that patch on the wall?" And you realize you never noticed it. Because you're the incumbent who doesn't see what exists. It's like the driver who's been waiting for you outside for a long time and has to take you to the airport, and you get into the car and you feel it's stuffy inside, and you say, "Roll down the windows, please." You see, there was a human being sitting inside the car and didn't feel that the air had gotten stale. That's what happens to incumbents. And stale markets have a way of throwing up signs. It's just that incumbents refuse to see those signs. The signs are commoditized offerings. There's a sea of sameness. This looks like that, looks like that, looks like this. The brand itself says that I'm different from that brand, but ask the consumer will say, I don't see too much of a difference. So commoditized offerings. Mindless operations. There are more standard operating procedures. There are more answers than questions. Wafer thin margins. You will hear conversations in the industry that say it's a very price sensitive market. We've tried everything that we could. The customer just doesn't budge. The customer just doesn't buy. And therefore, we'll have to kind of live with these kinds of margins. When you hear these kinds of organizations or this kind of a conversation where people seem to have resigned to their fate, saying this industry is like this. And if someone's talking a different language, they don't understand this industry. You are in a stale market. And the time has arrived for a stormer to arrive. And I'm not saying that the stormer will always arrive from outside. Usually they do, because they don't have a holy book. They don't have a Bible or a Gita of the industry saying that this is how industry works. So a challenger kind of comes in and he doesn't even know that impossible is impossible and goes ahead and does it. They even challenge what has been taken for granted for too long. So the second stage is spot the suboptimal. The moment a challenger comes in, the suboptimal in that industry is glaringly clear to the challenger, to this stormer, this potential stormer. Because, this stormer is not looking for answers to his current questions. The stormer is actually looking for new questions. Because when the time for step change has arrived, an organization which is wanting to look for answers for their old questions will not find an answer to how to storm the norms of their industry. Because innovation is not just about finding answers to your current questions. It's about discovering new questions. It's about asking those questions that industry needs to ask, but no one's asking. You get answers to questions you ask. How do you get answers to questions that you don't ask? When the question gets answered and the stormer spots that suboptimal, it's obvious in hindsight. It's breathtakingly obvious in hindsight, but only in hindsight. Let's look at some examples. Look at some of these industries. We know that Sony missed the MP3 revolution. Biggest beverage brands missed energy drinks revolution. Kodak missed the digital photography opportunity. And that this was invented within Kodak and it was rejected, digital photography, because they thought their patent or their USP was the chemical processing of and creating images. In fact, their campaigns, if you remember, used to say the Kodak moment. And who came in and actually did the Kodak moment much better than Kodak? The cheapest cameras, bad quality, in fact, inferior quality cameras killed the best cameras in the world. How? What is a Kodak moment? When your child, who's just a toddler, is crawling on the floor and for the first time stands up and tries walking, that's a Kodak moment. And when you want to capture that Kodak moment, you realize your amazing SLR camera is locked away in the closet. You pull it out and you realize there's no reel. And you put the reel in and you realize that there are no cells. And you put the cells in, then you realize baby is snoring in the bed. The Kodak moment is gone. And the camera that actually captured the Kodak moment was the cheap camera in your mobile phone that your wife had in her hands because you were too busy pulling out that camera from the closet. You go to a bird sanctuary and the bird shows you the huge wingspan and your Kodak isn't even in your hands to capture that Kodak moment. That's what happens. This is what happened with MP3 too. The purists of that industry said inferior quality sound. You see, but when the proposition becomes very compelling, often Like Christensen says, that disruptions happens at the bottom. And when the traction starts to happen, the thing that actually disrupted, the proposition that disrupted the industry becomes better and better and better quality. Today, digital music is much better than that analog that we spoke about. Today, digital photography is much, much better than the old style photography that we know of. Travel agents didn't foresee online booking, hotels didn't foresee Airbnb, transportation industry was blind to Uber, and the biggest of them all, the industry that attracts the most expensive talent out there is banking. And banking has missed the last 3 disruptions in banking. Banks missed the last 3 disruptions in banking industry. These disruptions came from outside. Mutual funds as a concept did not come from banks, came from outside. Microcredit came from Grameen Bank. Grameen Bank is not your usual bank. It was a very different kind of a bank from Bangladesh that brought in microcredit. Cryptocurrencies or blockchain as a technology did not come from banks. In fact, the banks, when they saw it, when it came first, rejected it. Because obviously, something that talks about distributed ledger challenges their very being, reduces their influence. So the incumbent has many reasons to reject the first disruption that comes in. So this is what happens when incumbents. There's a very interesting children's story I want to tell you. That actually highlights this very well. There's a pond. A pond is a water ecosystem. There are these flora and fauna of a pond. So there's the plants, there's fish, there are frogs, and there are other beings in there. And frogs do, every once in a while, frogs jump out. Being amphibians, they just jump out and do what they do, and then they go back into the water. And when they go back into the water, they go back with these fascinating stories of the world outside water. Every story that they tell, the beings that can't leave the water, start with, when we go out of water, we see this, we see that. We see buildings, we see humans, we see trees, we see birds, etc., etc., etc. This goes on for a long time. Till one day, a baby fish asks a very interesting question, a very naive question, and says, frog, when you go out of water, you see this and you see that, it must be a very fascinating world. We would love to see this world someday. But when you go out of water, what is water? The baby fish says, what's water? The frogs are stumped. They don't know how to answer that question. For an animal that was born in water, lives in water, will die in water, should be the PhD in water. How do you tell fish what water is? And then the frogs realize something very, very interesting. That in order to know water completely, you sure need to know water. You also need to know water. You need to have an outside-in perspective too. And that's the Stormer's perspective. When we work with organizations, large companies or startups, the first question we ask is, if you were fish, what's your water? What's everywhere? Your life depends on it, but you can't see it, but you can't sense it. But a Stormer will be able to, and therefore challenge you where you're not ready to be challenged. So this third stage is this: conceive the breakthrough and iterate to elegance. This is something that the startup world has taught the rest of the world. That if you wait for the best idea ever, you're going to wait forever. Take your alpha, take your beta into the market, and let the ecosystem start playing with your idea. The first idea that comes to your mind is simplistic. It's simplistic. In fact, you love it. You feel that's great. But the moment you iterate to elegance, when you reject multiple versions, maybe 10, 11 versions, pivot, 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 and you arrive at the version that really works in that ecosystem, you see, you don't invent it. You hit upon the winning version. So the time for those arrogant founders is gone. You know, the time for those arrogant, megalomaniacal founders who would say, I'm going to change the world, I'll put a dent in the universe, is gone. Because the new innovations will... Okay, let me ask you a question. Maybe some of you can answer this. You can just shout out from where you are. Who's the smartest person in the room? Someone said me. Who's the smartest person in the room? Okay, rhetorical question. The smartest person in the room is the room. No one is smarter than the whole collective. The next few disruptions and the storms will be caused not just by just some freak maverick individuals, but ecosystem itself. We are in the time of combinatorial innovation, where this startup comes, has a proposition, this startup has a proposition, another startup comes, uses this startup, this proposition, and this proposition, combines them and creates a disruptive thought. So you'll be working on stacks. And if you're working on stacks, you work with the different blocks that already exist. So you see, it's very interesting. Like I said, the first idea that comes to your mind is simplistic, but you go through complexity. You iterate through complexity, and the simplicity that emerges on the other side of complexity is elegant simplicity. That's what causes disruption. But in order to reach that elegant simplicity, there are no shortcuts. You must go through complexity. Now, that is the third stage. And so therefore, when we say price discovery, it's not just price discovery. It's also proposition discovery. It's also consumer segment discovery. You often discover a segment that you never knew existed when you entered the market. Look at the example of soccer moms in the US. Did any automobile company say, okay, we need minivans for these moms that take their children around for, to the school and then for the football, soccer sessions and stuff like that? Soccer mom was a segment that was thrown at the automakers by the market. So, segment discovery, proposition discovery. The fourth stage, we were surprised by this. Pace to critical mass. Very interesting, isn't it? There are a lot of good ideas out there, but there is a different, what differentiates a good idea that succeeds from the good ideas that don't succeed? Notice, I'm not saying good ideas that succeed from bad ideas. There are a large number of good ideas, but all of them don't succeed. And when we studied and tried to decode what was working for the good ideas that had succeeded, we realized, this is what we realized, pace to critical mass. The first critical question you need to ask is, what is the critical mass? I mean, this phrase has been borrowed from nuclear physics, you know that. But in terms of market segmentation, is it 10% consumers out there? It is 5% highly engaged consumers? What is the time frame we have in mind? The pace to critical mass is, at what pace do I need to hit the critical mass so that it creates a wave which creates a storm? Most of these organizations that succeeded were very clear about what the critical mass is, went after it. In a manner, their objectives were, this is my critical mass, I'm going to cover this in the next 6 months, in the next 1 year. If the pace doesn't happen, it's lukewarm. No organization in the world will have the wherewithal to educate all consumers about their proposition. You won't have the monies to educate everyone. So therefore, how do you get to that level of virtuosity, that virality, where even you can't stop the wave when it happens? There are enough examples of this. We were talking to Deep Kalra of Make My Trip, and he said they were on the verge of a collapse. His co-founder had left, and they realized when the data came in, often what happens is when you launch a product, you're in love with your idea. But the question you need to ask is, what are the assumptions on which this product idea rests on? Often those assumptions prove false. For Make My Trip, for example, the assumptions were people have the devices to make these transactions happen. People have the bandwidth. And third, people have the willingness to make these transactions happen. By the time they launched, they realized India wasn't ready. India didn't have the devices. India didn't have the bandwidth, and people were not willing. They would use the website to compare, contrast, and then walk down to the travel agent to buy their tickets. But again, when the data came in, they saw something very interesting, that there was a very small segment that was super loyal to Make My Trip. In fact, loved Make My Trip more than maybe it loved itself. And these were NRIs. Obviously, they had the devices, they had the bandwidth, and they had the willingness. They were even not just buying tickets for themselves, but for the family back home in India. The mother has to travel from, say, Chennai to Bangalore, and they would book from there. Also, they didn't have that option of walking down to that travel agent corner shop. They took a very brave decision. They said, for the next 5 years, we will not spend a rupee on India yet. Maybe our proposition isn't ready yet. Our assumptions have proven false. Let's focus our energies on this small segment. Although this small segment will not make us viable totally, but this small segment will provide us the runway to iterate to elegance. They focused on them for the next few years, and they iterated to elegance. And by the time they reached the stage where they were sure it'll fly in India, when they came to India, India was ready with devices, with bandwidth, and with willingness. So this is how, and so this also tells you that the critical mass that will give you the runway might not be your primary target audience that you had in mind. It might be a target audience somewhere in the periphery that you didn't even notice, but they are the guys who are going to give you the runway. So keep your eyes and ears open. Look for those people who love you more than you love yourself. Bugs and all. This is the fifth stage, fresh, vibrant market. Obviously, you've come in, you've challenged the paradigm, you've introduced the new norms, and now there is a whole set of new norms in the market. The market works very differently. Industry works very differently. And all those lazy, cynical incumbents who were saying, no, nothing can happen, we've tried everything, we tried this, we tried that, nothing worked, they are playing catch up. Because they have to, because the world's changed. But new norms, at the end of the day, are norms. And norms are just the lull before the next storm happens. The fact that this industry has gotten normed, the next storm is coming. Earlier, markets used to give every storm the time to live out its life cycle. Today, markets don't even give you that time. By the time the storm is brewing, the next storm is coming. We try to again decode what exactly is a stormer doing. This is a typical demand and supply curve. Market finds its equilibrium price for the commodity or the product on offer. So that's the market price you can see. There is a concept called total surplus. This is economics 101. It's when you add consumer surplus and producer surplus, you get total surplus. What is consumer surplus? The money that the consumer is willing to pay above the market price. What is producer surplus? The price that the producer is willing to accept below the market price. Add those, you get total surplus. And in a stagnant market, that's the total surplus. Very little. Very little total surplus means very little experimentation, very little leeway for iteration, and therefore no innovation. Therefore, you see what a stormer does, the stormer pushes it up. The market equilibrium price goes up. They discover new hidden surplus, which was hidden earlier, but they unlock new surplus. And there is huge total surplus, lot of experimentation, therefore a lot of innovation. So that's Storm the Norm. My time's up, so I'm going to just quickly close it. We typically work with ideas. Ideas is our currency. Ask yourself, what is the deeper need I'm catering to? Not the need that you can see in the market. So when you dig down, you'll see there are tracks of thinking. When you dig down further, you get to mental models. If you are able to shift the mental models, the impact in the market is disproportionate. If you challenge the idea, the impact is proportionate, but you're looking for a disproportionate impact. That's why you need to dig down. Let's look at, this is another very interesting thing, that everything that we find compelling and enduring, something that has endured and is still compelling, somewhere caters to a deeper primal need. Just that we don't know it. We talk about emotional and rational needs. Emotional and rational needs are just expressions of deeper primal needs. If you can find the primal need or the deeper need that you need to be hinged to, your proposition will be both compelling and enduring. See, the deeper need that TV caters to today predates the TV. It's as old as human beings. TV is its current most compelling satisfier. In fact, TV isn't. It's OTT now. And after OTT, there'll be something else. So the thing is, the current satisfier, these deeper needs predate your proposition. And therefore, a stormer is going to come and replace you. So that's why it's important for you to ask yourself, what is the deeper need I should be catering to? That's the PC, for example, just to give you an example. Why do we buy a PC? Because we want to compute, we want to create, we want to play. That's the answer. Dig deeper. What are we really trying to do? We are consuming intelligence, we are processing intelligence, and we are generating intelligence. In other words, sense-making, meaning-building, and choice-making. You dig deeper, what are we? But all of this we were doing even before the PC arrived. We were using abacus, we were using human faculties to do. But what did PC help us do? It enhanced our productivity and it enhanced our potency. Dig deeper. Therefore, it is a human capability augmenter. So therefore, dig deeper. It helps, it completes me, and it amplifies me. In other words, it helps me be more, do more, relate more. If this is at a deeper level what a PC is supposed to do, your next disruption that will replace the PC must help me do this much better. So that's why. So this is how you dig down to mental models. So again, founders usually say, my team doesn't think outside of the box. I mean, why don't they think outside of the box? It's not that teams are not capable of thinking outside of the box. The problem is that our dreams are so inside the box that we have no need to go outside of the box. So there's a very interesting story. If we can have a dream which is outside of the box, it'll make us break the box and go out. First, find a reason. So therefore, have a purpose, have an aspiration which is really sitting outside of the box. We'll be forced to, therefore, break the box and get to it. The story is, if you look up those most famous speeches on YouTube, you'll find one by John F. Kennedy, which was Man on the Moon speech, where he said, we'll put a man on the moon in the next 10 years. It galvanized the whole nation, not just NASA, the whole nation. In fact, it galvanized the whole world. And there's a story in there. We don't know whether it's part myth and part fact, part legend maybe, that Kennedy visited NASA headquarters. And so after the review, he went to the restroom, the toilet, and he met the janitor there and had a polite conversation with the janitor and said, so what do you do? And this is what the janitor had to say. He said, I'm helping put a man on the moon, sir. You know, if every person in your organization is directly connected with that purpose, wakes up in the morning and says, I'm putting the man on the moon, you will fly. Your proposition will fly. You'll find the ability to think broad and think deep and storm the norms of your industry. Thank you.